Hey everybody, welcome back. We are on I think this is part 4? Part 4 of the Adrax Agatone. If it's part 3 then I apologise, but we are refining the green sketchy highlights that we put on the model in part 1 today. So all the green armour, so you'll see we have 4 colours up on the wet palette. We have 3 of the same colours that we used when we originally started doing all the sketching, and we have an extra one as well. So from left to right, the first one on the left, first colour on the left there is moot green. That's the new colour that we've got. The next one over is warpstone glow. Then black green from Vallejo, and then nocturne green is the darkest green that we've got. Now they are pretty much, well, they are straight from the pot on the wet palette. However, like I said before, the wet palette is incredibly wet at the moment because of the weather, so it's pretty much just sitting on a massive film of water. So you'll see whenever I go and grab a little bit of the paint, I'm grabbing it right from the edge, which is going to be the most diluted part of that paint droplet. And also I'm dragging it out and just kind of pulling and thinning it down a little bit on the wet palette as well. So we're probably, if you were trying to replicate it and it's not quite so hot and you're not using a very wet palette, it's probably 2 parts paint to 1 part water, something like that. Maybe a little bit more, water. And the idea that we're going to be looking at for pretty much the whole video is the transitions and softening off and enhancing all the highlight sketches that we threw on the model. Now I try really hard to be disciplined and stick to one half of the model on this one, and I think I do pretty well. Occasionally I drift and I get distracted by seeing like a finger or something, and I'm like, oh, I'll just highlight the finger. But yeah, I try to stay on one side of the model so that we can finish one side of the model with this green. So the important things that you need to bear in mind here is that if you got the highlight like a little bit in the wrong place, then we can address that at this point. So you'll see here we're going in with a moot green and we're putting this final highlight on the top of the knee. So because the light source that I'm imagining in my head is coming from high on the right side of the camera, so if you hold your right hand up to the screen, up to that top corner, that's where I'm imagining the light source is coming from. So when you hold the model square like this, it's going to be the highlights are going to be leaning towards that side. So any highlights are going to be predominantly on that side and stronger and brighter on that side. So that's why that moot green is a little bit over towards the 1 o'clock point on the top of that knee pad. So the sketches that we put down are just guidelines to where we want that light to be, and we can take those guidelines and we can enhance them or move them around a little bit. You remember last time when I was working on the left knee pad, I got the highlight position slightly wrong, so we address that and we pull that highlight a little bit further over. So what we're looking at doing, the black green is going to be the pretty much the black green and the warpstone glow are the predominant paints that we're using today in this video. So where you have a transition mark between the black green and the nocturne green before, from when we were sketching it out, what we want to do is we want to get some black green, this thin down paint that we've got, and just pull the paint across that transition line towards the black green. So if you've got black green and then nocturne green, you want to get the black green, have it thin down as much as it is as we're pulling it off the wet palette, and then drag it across that transition line of the paint, and you want to drag it from the nocturne green side towards the brighter side basically. and that will soften down and take away. It's a perfect example here. You can see on the hip plate how you've got the really harsh line from the black green to the nocturne green, and then also the warpstone glow. Those lines, they're the lines that we are trying to soften out. So those highlights are in the right place, but the transition between the two highlights needs to be a little bit softer. So that's what we're working on. And then once we've softened it out, like we're doing here, we're just enhancing the highlight, and we're putting one more high highlight onto it to increase the contrast. And here we put that high highlight in with moot green, and then you can grab that the warpstone glow and just come in and just soften the edge again. So it's all about softening the edges really in this video. So we're working and making sure that any edges which look hard, so a hard edge is what we don't want. We're just going to go in and it's almost like a stippling action, a little soft stippling action. You notice I'm not pushing very hard with the brush. I haven't got very much paint on the brush. It's watered down paint as well, so we're not making a particularly hard mark. We're making a soft mark with the brush as well. And then obviously we're going back in with the moot green here just to add that final highlight. Now, another thing, because we're stippling, we are getting this little the interesting texture marks that we've talked about before. As soon as we're adding those little texture marks on, it gives the model a little bit more interest, something to look a little bit more interesting as you're looking at the model. It's not all the same really soft smooth blends or anything like that. So these little kind of soft marks are adding a little bit of interest as well. So yeah, this is the hip plate that I was talking about earlier. How you can see that harsh line between the black green and the nocturne green, the transitions between the dark and the medium green. And here we are. I'm just going to zoom in a little bit on the palette as well, so you can see a little bit better what I do with the paintbrush. So we're pulling the nocturne green across that transition to darken it down and soften it a little bit. Now, another way of doing this is by glazing. You could get these paints and thin them down a little bit more, and then glaze across the transitions. However, if you do that, you need to be a little bit bolder with the transitions, a little bit bolder with the size of them. This way you can kind of manipulate them a little bit easier and change the size of them as you're going along. If you are glazing, you have to make sure that the contrast is really there to start with. So you'd probably go all the way up to moot green straight away, and then glaze back down, glaze those transitions back down from there. Whereas doing it this way, we've got a little bit more control over the size. I do it both ways. I do it both ways. I just fancy doing it this way on this one. No particular reason why or anything. I just thought it would be an interesting one to try and then video as well. So the door slamming. I've got the window open again because it's quite warm here. So at least that's a door closed. It's not going to knock anymore. Right. So any sharp edges. And any little rivets like those rivets that you saw there, any sharp edges like this are going to have a very, very strong highlight. So they're going to be the brightest highlight, and they're going to be really, really strong. So that's why we got that moot green in there. And we pulled it across as well, so it was a little bit chunkier, so that we can then soften that transition line down, because that's quite a prominent panel on the model. And it's facing upwards towards where the light is going. It's going to be catching more of the light than any of the other panels around it, and also that's going to be one of the panels which is prominent when you're looking at the model. So if it doesn't look green, well, if it does look green, then it will be giving the whole model itself a little bit more of a green look as well. So you can see the difference in the brightness between that one and the one on the left hand side, and also the one on the left hand side, you can see that harsh transition as well there between the nocturne green and the black green. So that's the transition that we're trying to soften out a little bit. Now working down the knees, working down the legs towards the knees now, that upper thigh part, because that's a cylinder, we're going to have a nice straight line of highlight running all the way down it. It's not going to be spherical like we did on the kneecap or anything like that. And then there's also just other little edges. This little edge here that we're kind of adding in, that's pretty much just to show the detail off, really. Arguably it might not have a highlight on it in real life, but that's one of those rule of cool highlights that you just add on, because if it wasn't there then you wouldn't be able to see where that panel finished. So you can almost imagine that the light was shining off the gold trim from the knee or something, so it just catches that the bottom of that thigh plate. The moot green, that really nice high moot green highlight that we're putting on, we're only putting that on edges, and we've spoken about this before, that are facing upwards. So edges which are facing upwards, so that edge next to so there's a little panel on that thigh, which I put a little bit of a softer highlight down there, so that's running down that centre of the thigh. But the little panel there, which I'm just ticking there, I'm not highlighting both sides of that gap, because it's only going to be the edge which is facing upwards that's going to catch the light on that. It's really difficult to explain. So the edge that is the edge that is facing down is not going to catch as much light as the edge which is facing upwards. So you've got the highlight line that's running down the centre of the thigh, which kind of almost coincides with the edge anyway. But I'm specifically not doing a very, very strong edge highlight on that one. It's just on the small little panel inside it that gives it a little bit more of a light direction as well. And trying to find angles to paint things like this, and you've got to go between cables and things to get your brush in. I do make a little bit of a mistake here. Now you can see when I was applying the paint there, the paint was very, very heavy on the brush. There was a big blob, and it has actually blobbed on the model, so I have to go back in and kind of resolve that and put a little bit of nocturne green in the recesses again. So always be careful about how much paint you have on the brush. I am cleaning the brush quite regularly. Again, it's quite warm, so the paint can dry on the brush quite quickly. Yeah, so this is just building up these highlights again. So we had a highlight mark on this panel here, and as I go, I try to decide how high I want the highlight to go on this panel. I think if it doesn't go right up to moot green, I think it would look slightly odd. So I do put a little bit of moot green on here. Now this is that edge there is a downward facing edge, and that contradicts what I've just been saying about downward facing edges not having the moot green on. However, that edge there is such a prominent edge, if it didn't have that little edge highlight on it, it wouldn't show up. So that's a rule of cool highlight, if you like. You can imagine that it's kind of caught a little bit of bounce highlight or something off the rock or something. But that edge that I highlighted that was facing downwards, kind of technically it wouldn't have that moot green on it. However, because the panel underneath it is nice and dark, if you add that moot green, you've got a nice kind of contrasting transition between the dark and the light, and it just looks good. I was smiling when I was painting this because it looks like I'm painting a heart. So it's a spherical highlight on this little shield bit here, but because of the trim that comes in at the top, it ends up looking a little bit like a heart. So yeah, I'm painting a little green heart here. Again, just kind of stippling and adding this moot green. Moot green and warp zone glow are very good for working softly on transitions like this, because they are very translucent themselves. So they make a very good soft mark. Pretty much all the greens on this palette make a nice soft mark. Now this is a good example of following a highlight line, because the arm is going to be the highlight across the arm is going to always it's always going to follow all the way across. So you'll see when I come down this panel here, I add the highlight across here. I think I might turn it around in a second, but that highlight running across is also going to follow exactly the same line as it gets to the wrist and then across the top of the thumb as well. So that highlight line has to, so there's the highlight line on the wrist, there's the highlight line on the top of the thumb, and then that highlight line is going to follow all the way across that arm as well. So that's one nice straight highlight line. Again, it's very important to get these little lines right in terms of helping to sell the light direction. Again, these are edges which are facing upwards, so they're going to get the nice moot green bright highlight. We're going to put a little bit of a nice bright one on that wrist plate and the fingers. The fingers are going to get plenty of moot green. Trying to keep the I didn't wait for the Warpstone Glow to dry on the fingers, so it's a little bit of a chunky highlight. I'm going to have to go back and tidy that up later. But yeah, because the fingers are small, they're going to have a nice pin prick kind of pin highlight on there. So it's trying to pull a good highlight on that panel there before you get the highlight underneath it. So that highlight there is an edge, panel edge, which is facing upwards. The panel edge above that has not got any moot green on it. Again, that shows the contrast and a nice high contrast between the two panel lines. So one thing you can kind of take away from this as well is, again, it's how little paint I have on my brush, how slow the brush is moving. I'm trying to get this is where I'm trying to get the foot in view before I start painting it. How slow the brush is moving, how little paint I have on the brush as well. You'll see it's drying a little bit, so I just have to pull off that little dried drop on the end of the brush. But the less paint you have on the brush, to a certain degree, gives you more control once you take it to the model. If you're doing small marks like we're doing for pretty much this whole episode, then we're not going to need much paint on the brush, and we can keep going back to the wet palette. It's one of the joys of the wet palette. The wet palette is so consistent; it gives you the right amount of paint every time, so you can keep just not popping back to the wet palette and grabbing it up. So the feet down here, we're working on the feet and the ankles and things. This toe guard is a spherical object, so it's going to have a sphere of a highlight, which kind of bends around a little bit as we get towards the ankle. So whatever you're highlighting always takes the shape of whatever the shape it is. So the highlight should look like that shape. And again, we're just going in with the Warpstone Glow or the black green across the two transition marks, just to soften them down. Now the part of the ankle there which I'm highlighting, and he's got a bit of a triangular highlight. That's so the lower part of that, because it would be catching a little bit more light, you want it to have you can see as I'm holding it there, that lower ankle part is facing upwards here, so it's going to be catching a bit more of a light, and it's going to have a softer transition between light and dark. It's not going to be quite as abrupt as some of the other ones that we've seen, so we can soften that out. Now this is where painting in this style differs from, for instance, the heavy metal style, where they would just edge highlight all the way around all of this, and you wouldn't see all these little light volumes. So when I say light volumes as well, light volumes means the volume of yeah, it just means the volume of light. So the shape of the light highlight on the panel. So if you have a big panel that's got a big highlight on it, then it's going to have a big light volume. So that's a large light volume. I like painting in light volumes. It allows you to kind of play around with contrast really well, and in my opinion, it just looks more interesting than edge highlighting absolutely everything. Gives you some more tonal variety across the model. So because that little shin pad, the knee guard there, because that little knee guard is a small round knee guard, it's going to have a small round light volume. Now this is glazing, so I have pulled a little bit of that Warpstone Glow out from the wet palette, and I am glazing across all the transitions now, just to try to pull them together just a fraction more. It softens any brush marks just a little bit. I know we've been working on the textures and everything, the textures of the brush marks, but we can just soften them down just a fraction. So it's a little bit of Warpstone Glow that we can pull out. And then it's little things like this little vent here looks so good once you've highlighted it, and just put a nice little sharp bit of moot green on there. It just it just looks really good. Little dots on the upward facing edges. So because the moot green is quite translucent when you're putting it on, you can build it up in a couple of layers, a couple of coats. So once we have highlighted it, we can go back in and put some little dots on, and the dots do show up. Say this is where I get distracted, and I started going over to that hip plate, and I was like, nope, don't need that. Stay on one side of the model, Chris. So this is pretty much all just done with these 4 colours. So you have Nocturne Green, Black Green, Warpstone Glow, and Moot Green. Remember, we ended up not really using the black and Nocturne mix last time. So yeah, it's important to have the first 3. You can kind of use, so if you wanted to use Nocturne and Warpstone Glow as the black green mid-tone, then you can do. So that would be using 3 paints, but it's important to have this amount of paints ready for transition, if you like, so that you can just drop back in and you know that you're picking up the right colour to be blending and pulling the transitions together. So I'm just adding a couple of spot highlights on this, which are following the highlights across from the arm. So running across the top of the arm, across the top of the thumb, across that little shield or fastener, if you like, for the Drake cloak, and then that highlight is then going to come across and hit the gorget as well. So I'm just making sure I got that, and just finding and spotting little parts of the armor that need highlighting. Again, this is a rule of cool highlight, so that little part of the breastplate there, that is definitely a downward facing edge, but we've got some moot green on it, because adding that moot green on there, you can see that now pops out and shows the definition and the edge of that breastplate. So there we go. I hope you enjoyed that one. I will pop up a finished photo of it now, so you can have a look at it. I've just popped down and had a quick photograph of it, so I've finished off the rest of the armour. I hope you enjoyed that one. The next video I think is going to be the flames and the head. So I will get that set up on my modelling handle, and I will see you again soon. Thanks very much, everybody. See you later. Bye.